manufacturing, and deployment of medical countermeasures.
President Biden's budget for fiscal year 2024 includes a multi-billion-dollar investment to make sure America is prepared for the next public health crisis. He includes $1.6 billion for global health action. The U.S. previously committed $450 million. Just this week, I am pleased to highlight that President Biden committed an additional $250 million to the fund to ensure the fund's success. President Biden has been a champion of the fund from the very beginning. The United States very much looks forward to our continued partnership on these issues, but by the world coming together and fighting for what's right. We are deeply committed to all the issues being discussed at WHA 76, and we concur with Director General Tedros. We must make progress. And I wish to stress, from our perspective, the quicker we can come together, the sooner we will all be safe.
No one's safe till everyone's safe.
No one is safe.
No one is safe.
Nobody is safe
until we're all safe.
Health experts have been saying no.
We find that very insulting, goes against the science. Are you a doctor or a medical doctor?
I've worked over 30 years on health policy.
You're not a medical doctor. Do you have a science degree? To tell over 100 million Americans we have no right to determine our own medical care. You alone are on high, and you've made these decisions, a lawyer with no scientific background, no medical degree. This is an arrogance coupled with an authoritarianism that is unseemly and un-American. You, sir, are the one ignoring the science. You should be ashamed of yourself and apologize to the American people. Quit lording it over people, acting as if these people are deplorable and unwashed. You want to hold them down and vaccinate them?
We follow the facts and the science at HHS.
And is HHS in charge of regulating carbon emissions? Am I missing something here? Why do you guys have an Office of Climate Change and Health Equity?
I think it's a proven fact that the impacts of climate change are affecting the health of Americans and people around the world.
How have you quantified that?
Excuse me?
How have you quantified that?
I can get you some of the research that's been done. We can do any number of ways to quantify it. You can let me know.
I have a way of quantifying it. Here, I'll help you out. Since 1900, deaths due to nature have plummeted by over 90%.
This is prime time.
Yes. Welcome, my friends, to Armor of Truth Live number 243.
There's a completely negative correlation there, and we're pretending like it's a crisis, and we're scaring people to death about it. What you're saying is terrifying. What you're saying will harm people.
That's right. What you're saying will harm people. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 243. This is about emergency powers. What do you know about emergency powers? Are you aware of what's being done? What has been done for decades in the United States? Let's get before we get into the meat of the show here. Let's go here and visit with G.K. Chesterton one more time. It is only by believing in God that we can ever criticize the government. How about that? Only by believing in God can we ever criticize the government. Once God is abolished, once the people no longer say they believe or they believe in some false version, well, then the government becomes the God at that point. Wherever the people do not believe in something beyond the world, something beyond the government, then they will worship the strongest thing in the world. They will end up worshiping government. Welcome to the show, my friends. We're talking about the pandemic treaty. That's not the topic here, but that's part of what we're talking about. We're talking about abuse of power through emergency powers. You're going to find this very interesting. Nobody's really talking about this. And it's only been recently that within the federal government in America that reforms have been talked about. You see, these guys here are able to control your life. How are they able to do that? Don't we have a constitution? How did it happen? We're Tedros. Fauci doesn't do it anymore. He's retired, but you get the idea. Let's drop in for 1 second here to set the stage for what's at stake when we're talking about emergency powers. What does that mean for you?
Faith is resistance.
Hi, my name is James Roguski, and the purpose of this video is to encourage everyone on planet Earth to speak out publicly and express your opinion in regards to what the WHO is currently doing and what they have done about the proposed pandemic treaty, which is currently being negotiated in secret. Over 300 amendments to the existing international health regulations, which is also currently being negotiated in secret. Please speak out about the amendments that were adopted last year and only have about 6 months left to reject them.
Implementing the amended IHR shall enable member states to detect, prevent, and respond to public.
This is the section you need to pay attention to. Listen to what Abdullah Asiri, I can't tell if that's an R or a B. Abdullah, let's get my Asiri or Asibi, co-chair of the WGIHR. That is the working group for the international health regulations. You need to know what the international health regulations are if you're going to understand anything about this so-called pandemic treaty.
Public health emergencies and reduce the chance of pandemics. The world, however, requires a different level of legal mandates, such as the pandemic treaty, to navigate through a particular pandemic, should one occur, and it will. Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
I have explained in great detail on various articles on my Substack, jamesroguski.substack.com. Now is the time for you to speak up to the delegates who will be meeting throughout the remainder of 2023 and into 2024. These negotiations should be stopped because of the crimes and the mistakes that have been made over the last 4 years. Call me directly, 310-619-3055. Please share this video and share this website. Speak up now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, and James Roguski means that. You can call him at 310-619-3055. But did you hear what our friend from the East had to say here? This is at the Strategic Roundtable back in May of this year. He said that restriction of individual liberties is necessary during an emergency.
To navigate through a particular pandemic, should one occur, and it will.
How do you think he knows that it will happen?
Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
During a pandemic, and here's the problem, my friends. What is a pandemic? How do you define it? As we've seen in these updates to the so-called treaty, to the international health regulations, what the definition of a pandemic is very broad. It's not defined clearly. In fact, there are many reasons to call an emergency. All right, so you need to reconsider what you think you know about what everyone's been calling the proposed pandemic treaty. As James Roguski said, he suspects that the actual document is quite different than you might assume it to be. We haven't been allowed to see the document that's being negotiated behind the scenes. We're looking at, Summer, do you remember, what was it? Was it what document, what year was it? The updates to the
IHR
regulations?
from 2005 has been updated as of 2022, May of 2022. Yeah.
That's right.
So that's the thing that has teeth that everybody's already subscribed to, if you will. And then the pandemic treaty is something different, which Rozgesky speculates that perhaps that's sort of like the one that they want everyone looking at, because they're going to neuter it and make it neutral while they're doing all this other stuff with the IHR.
Yeah, so it's international health regulations behind the scenes. That's what no one is really privy to. So what you need to do is you need to go to exitthewho.com, and that looks like this. Well, there you go. You'll get James there. Exitthewho.com, and you'll find all the information that you need to be able to do something about this, right? You'll understand what HR 79 is. That is. Here you go. This is some legislation in the works to fight this. There are more things going on now, but we don't have time to sit and do nothing right now. Download the Bureau's text of the so-called pandemic treaty. Read the document. Now, it's boring, but understand, right? Your liberty is at stake. Rozgesky says, please realize that another document called the compilation text, this is what someone was talking about, is being kept secret as of June 25th, 2023. This document, purportedly around 200 pages long, contains the original submissions from a number of nations and would reveal which nations proposed which sections of the text. Why is the compilation text being kept secret? So this video on James Rozgesky's YouTube channel, an analysis of the World Health Organization CA+, that's the pandemic treaty, the so-called pandemic treaty, that's the Bureau's text. And the problem is that the negotiations regarding this are really not about health at all. James Rozgesky believes, and I agree with him, that it's really an international trade dispute. These issues should be negotiated within the World Trade Organization, not the World Health Organization, right? Because as James has speculated, and I think rightly to this point, this is a venture capital investment scheme. And it features things like conflicts of interest, the Conference of the Party, that's the COP, that's basically the cabal. Crony capitalism, corporate colonialism, a cartel designed to control genomic testing and data corruption, collusion, conspiracy. Many reasons why this needs to be shut down. Conflicts of interest and corruption are just one. The WHO has been infiltrated by big pharma, big money, big foundations, everything big. Big Bill Gates. Right. We're going to talk about this tonight. How has it happened, and is there any precedent for this kind of thing? Because if we can find a precedent for it at some point in history, we can know how to respond to it a little better. The WHO follows the dictates of so-called relevant stakeholders, while ignoring the needs and desires of us, the people that they want to control, of course. And that is Machiavellianism. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. Another reason this should be stopped, misguided focus on medical treatments. The WHO has been influenced and bought by the manufacturers of vaccines. Bill Gates, for one. They're a bureaucracy, and they're rife with waste. WHO is dominated by bureaucrats, obviously technocrats that are not answering to you. They're not answering to representatives from any government. They answer to the pharmaceutical industry. And they waste an enormous amount of money. They just voted themselves a $7 billion budget back at the last World Health Assembly meeting. Fear-mongering is another reason this is bogus. The WHO has sounded the alarm and wasted time, effort, and money declaring fake public health emergencies of international concern. For example, the donkeypox, or the monkeypox, swine flu, that was H1N1. Failing to act swiftly or effectively to address Ebola and CV19, we'll just call it for now. Also, dangerous recommendations. They made horrible, corrupt recommendations in support of the expanded use of these pharmaceutical technologies, these drugs. Drugs such as opiates have been responsible for millions of unnecessary deaths, right? What has the World Health Organization done about that? We've covered that here. Summer's done good work in researching on the fentanyl epidemic. Maybe it's a pandemic. I don't know. It's certainly, if the World Health Organization was serious about what they're there to do and serious in upholding their original mission, that would be something they would be addressing. They also operate on a false model of health. It's overly dependent upon, for example, petrochemical-based pharmaceutical, medical, hospital, industrial complex, which practices allopathic medicine, right? It's not about cures. It's about always being treated, right? They want to make you a customer, a lifelong customer, and there's where the trans agenda comes in, right? Just as soon as a child starts taking hormones or some surgery, they're a lifetime customer. They're always going to be tethered to the pharmaceutical industry. Power grab, another reason this is bogus. The WHO's blatantly seeking to increase its power by pursuing what we've been talking about here, a legally binding proposed pandemic treaty. And these proposed amendments to the international health regulations. Two separate things. These are two separate things. ExitTheWho.com is where you can learn everything you need to know there. This will take you to James Roguski's Substack, but it's also on a website. If you're not able to get into Substack for some reason, don't worry. You'll find the information. They've made mistakes. This is clear. They're out of touch. The delegates to the World Health Assembly are unelected, unaccountable, unknown people. Do you know? Right? If this was to go through, what it would mean is that the international health regulations, this body, would have a member, a representative for every member nation, that when an emergency was declared, that representative would go to each member nation and basically control things. Basically tell the leaders what to do. That is the power that the Department of Health and Human Services has today. And another story that we have for you in this report tonight, the Department of Health and Human Services has been weaponized. I mean, I don't mean they're being armed, right? More on that later. And another reason that this thing is bogus, secrecy. The WHO operates in secrecy. There is no transparency, right? They want to control everything, everywhere, but they don't want you to know what they're doing. Far too much of what is done by the WHO remains hidden. And just what we know is horrible enough. We've covered some of that here. Some of the stuff around the world where the United Nations and the WHO have responded to certain things in the world and just disastrous results. Real human rights violations. And so what we don't know about what to do, and it could be horrible. So the WHO has lost sight of its original purpose, and it's beyond repair. We need to exit the WHO right now. That's the only answer for the United States. This system is crumbling. All right, so we need to be ready. We need to be aware. If you're fed up with the government, hospital, medical, pharmaceutical, media, industrial complex, and would like to help build a holistic alternative to the World Health Organization, or if you need more information, or you don't quite understand why this is really important, feel free. Once again, contact James Roguski. Go to his Substack. Go to ExitTheWho.com. That's a good portal to get in. He is the expert. and he's our best asset on this matter. So you can call James Roguski at 310-619-3055 to ask him questions, if you like. He's got everything available on his. If you go to Exit the Who, you'll probably find every bit of information you need just on that website or just at that link. I was trying to find another graphic with James' number on it. 310-619-3055. Call and talk to James Roguski. Ask him if you've got questions. You don't know what's going on. Is this serious? Is this real? Talk to him. That's what he's there to do. He's made it his business to do this. And support the man if you can. So let me just go ahead and welcome the lovely Summer to the show.
It's lovely to be here.
There she is, folks.
It's been a minute.
We've been away for how many days now?
Well, I think around 11.
Since our last show.
11 days, 12 days.
A lot of reading, a lot of writing, just a bit of a vacation.
And we did a little bit of studio updating.
Right, we've been working in the studio a bit.
Yeah.
I have to do that every 6 or 8 months just to keep things working in here, because if you were waiting for us to go live a few minutes ago, just things were out of whack. It took us about 15 minutes just to get the just to get on the air. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for being patient with us. And thank you for being with me tonight here on The Late Show.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So the American system of government has had a major effect on the governments of the world. So we're going to talk about emergencies now and the abuse of power, right? This is the new tyranny. This is what we have to keep our eyes on right now. As far as I'm concerned, right now, the two most dangerous movements or things going on in the world are this abuse of power through national emergencies or public health emergencies and artificial intelligence. Those two things, because they will work together eventually. We need to keep our eyes on what's happening there. Now, while tyranny will always exist in this world until Jesus Christ returns to establish his earthly kingdom, but from the middle of the 17th century to the present, with great influence from the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, democracy and representative republican. That's what we have in America. Is we have a representative republic. But these forms of government, freedom, liberty, these forms of government have gradually become more and more common. In the middle of the 15th century, the Gutenberg movable type printing press was created near Frankfurt, Germany. The first book, you can find evidence that shows perhaps in Korea 100 years before this, there was metal movable type available and printing was being done there. But in Europe, the first book printed in Europe using metal movable type was the Bible. It's called the Gutenberg Bible, and it was based on the Latin Vulgate version. Approximately 180 copies of the Gutenberg Bible were printed and first made available in about the year 1455. And then, in less than 50 years' time, books and printed material had spread to more than 270 cities in Central, Western, and Eastern Europe. And within 50 years, print shops were active in 110 different places in Europe. So from that time on, the printed book was in universal use in Europe, but also in the New World. Knowledge and information spread throughout Europe, and a heavy demand for printed material in the New World, be North America, revolutionized not only the book, but the very nature of worldwide communication. So in our lifetime, it has been the advent of the internet. But then it was the printing press. So this explosion of information was an important catalyst of the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, and the scientific revolution. And of course, we've seen a similar explosion of information. It came along in the late 1980s and early 90s when the average home was first able to afford a computer and log on to the internet. Today, more people are better educated than ever before. Or at least, we could say, more people have access to more information than ever before. Particularly in the last century, with the advent of radio, television, and the internet, governments have become, they're forced now to be more accountable to the people. They've been forced to operate in a more transparent manner than at any point in history. However, the urge to be as God still dominates the human heart, and corrupt rulers have had to find new ways to obfuscate their actions. And so today, a primary method of the nefarious ruler, the wicked ruler, is to make his tyranny appear as if it were really in the best interest of the people. So rather than brute force, rather than jackboots today, a more sophisticated type of deception is required. And that is to make it seem as if the ruler is operating lawfully. And in many cases, perhaps he is operating lawfully. As you see, that's what the World Health Organization is doing. They're trying to, they're playing the long game, right? This is the result of Agenda 21, the documents that were laid out as early as 1972, in earnest in 1992, in the Rio Declaration. But one such sophisticated ploy that we see now is the abuse of power made possible via the declaration of national emergencies and public health emergencies. While this kind of subterfuge has been active in the American system of government for decades, this method of subtle tyranny has recently become the modus operandi of international governance at the United Nations, at the European Union, and of course at the World Health Organization. In the United States, national emergencies can be declared by the president under the National Emergencies Act. I think it's 1971 is when that was. And they can cover a wide range of issues like public health, national security, national disasters, and more. In fact, as you're going to see later, this fraudulent approach has even allowed the militarization of many federal agencies against the very people they are constitutionally charged to serve. So what do you know about emergency powers? What do you know about national emergencies, public health emergencies? What's the big deal? What's the problem? The problem essentially is with public health emergencies, it's rule by decree. It gives leaders the opportunity to become authoritarians. Did you know that in 2019, the United States government had 27 national emergencies in effect? Now, I got data from 2019 because it was difficult to get good data in the last couple years. So I wanted to use a year that was before 2020, before a lot of public health emergencies were declared. So in a normal year, still 27 national emergencies were in effect. For example, what are they? Like, what are national emergencies were in effect, right? A lot of them are renewed every year. For example, in 2001, after 9/11, President George W. Bush declared a national emergency that severely impacted the rights of Americans. That has been quietly renewed every year for the last 22 years. Is there still a threat? No, there is no threat. It wasn't about terrorism. It was about control. So that's an example. Another example, on January 21st, 2020, the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary at that time, Alex Azar, declared a public health emergency that granted the Department of Health and Human Services increased authority over federal resources and equipment and state, local, tribal, and territorial health departments, and more. On March 13th, 2020, so that was January 21st, and then a couple months later, on March 13th, that's when it really hit the fan here in the United States. March 13th, 2020. President Donald J. Trump declared a national emergency that increased the executive branch's authority over federal resources and equipment in state and local, tribal, and territorial health departments. These declarations, although they were billed to you as in your best interest, we're fighting for your safety, these declarations clothed elected and many, many more unelected officials in greater authority to bypass all regular vaccine safety and quality control measures, to mobilize federal resources and equipment, to coordinate with the Department of Defense and U.S. manufacturers. In fact, it was the Department of Defense who really ran Operation Warp Speed. It was the Department of Defense who ordered the jabs. They ordered the jabs. And in fact, the pharmaceutical companies who received the orders for these toxic concoctions were so nervous about the fact that there was going to be no safety measures. The DOD had to give them all kinds of assurances, and protections to keep them from facing what they would have certainly faced, knowing what we know now, which is massive lawsuits. So these emergencies gave unelected officials the authority to facilitate the deployment of a biological military countermeasure into the U.S. market. Now, that term countermeasure is what the Department of Defense called the vaccine. Why? The DOD ordered countermeasures, but in the media, they were called vaccines. They're not vaccines. So the World Health Organization is planning to deploy the same tactics by establishing a legally binding framework agreement, which is what we've been talking about, where very loosely defined emergency declarations will grant the WHO, via international health regulations, authority to dominate world governments and create. This is a big point. This is what James Roguski pointed out. It'll also give them the authority to create and profit from a new market, a market of pandemic products that they are creating and that they will completely control. The abusive potential of national emergencies, of the National Emergencies Act, was exposed for all to see in July 2020 at the height of the pandemic panic, when government officials were stretching the limits of their authority in every conceivable way. Activists across the political spectrum loudly object to this misuse of emergency powers by the White House to bypass debate. Supreme Court justices also object to the invocation of special powers to address so-called emergencies that never end, right? Emergencies happen and end, a true emergency. But what we see happening here are emergency declarations that never end, right? The George W. Bush in 2001 declared an emergency that's been renewed for 22 years. And so do lawmakers. Last week, members of Congress, this a couple weeks ago, this was last week in the last few days of June. Congress held a hearing on abuse of emergency powers by the executive branch. But don't hold your breath waiting for that reform to come. Elizabeth Goitein, I think it is, Goitein, Senior Director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, told members of the Congress on May 24th, quote, "The powers triggered by a national emergency declaration include authorities that are highly susceptible to abuse. They could be misused to undermine our democracy or our republic." And they already have been. They've been exploited by presidents on both sides of the aisle, both parties, to implement long-term policy goals in the face of congressional opposition or inaction. These powers must be subject to meaningful checks against abuse and overreach, unquote. Well, that seems obvious, doesn't it? Well, it's good to hear that someone's saying it, but look, do we really expect anything to come? It's a funny thing, right? We really expect, after what we've seen for the past three or 4 years now, you really expect, right, the federal government to do something good for us at this point? Are we it's interesting, don't you think so, Summer, that it's interesting that all of a sudden people are, when it comes to aliens and UFOs, they're willing to listen to these whistleblowers coming out of the government. All of a sudden, let's listen to these guys. Let's listen. Surely
all a big distraction.
Surely these congressmen, man, they really want to know about these. Come on.
Get everybody dreaming and thinking that there's something cosmic out there that everybody's going to get ready for, you know? So.
Well, the hearing they had last week was about the 1976. It was the 1976 National Emergencies Act, and it was held by the House Committee on Emergency Management. While the National Emergencies Act was intended to consolidate and formalize emergency powers that were under congressional oversight, it lost much of its power to limit, corrupt officials. When the Supreme Court ruled in INS versus Chadha in 1983 that the law's legislative veto over emergency executive power is unconstitutional. More on that in a second. The Niskanen Center's Soren Dayton, guy's name is Soren Dayton, said, quote, "This meant that Congress's built-in check on national emergency powers was no longer viable and transformed its delegation of emergency powers into something far broader than intended." Kind of like a blank check. And it continues. He says, "Indeed, since Chadha, there have been virtually no checks on the president's national emergency powers." And that was 1983. No checks on the president's national emergency powers. And boy, they're using them, right? Subcommittee Chairman Scott Perry, a Republican from Pennsylvania, and Satya Thalam, a policy advisor for Arnold and Porter, a politically prominent law firm, also were testifying there. Although one purpose of the NEA was to end perpetual states of emergency, the law does grant the president authority to renew an emergency declaration, right? So it was provided in the original legislation that the emergency isn't going to last forever. But then here we go. Now in 83, they gave them the opportunity to renew the emergencies. The attorneys who authored the report pointed out that there are currently 37. Now this is of this year. As we sit here, or as of last week, currently 37 national emergency declarations in effect. Now that number was at 27 in 2019. But in the pandemic age now, or whatever, 37 national emergency declarations in effect right now, some of which have been renewed for decades. The Congressional Research Service prepared a report on some of the emergency powers available to the president. Examples given in the report of statutory authorities under the law range from maintaining an island under federal jurisdiction in its natural state for scientific observation and investigation or something like that, ranging to the power to close any radio station or authorize the use or control of any such station during emergencies. That's a little more severe, isn't it? And everything in between and beyond. So since 1976, when Congress passed the National Emergencies Act, U.S. presidents have declared 75 national emergencies, justifying their potential exercise of emergency powers. Of those 75 declarations, more than 40 remain in effect today, as we just told you. There's 37 as of last week, with the oldest dating back to the 70s. Can you believe there's a national emergency being renewed right now that was declared in the 70s, probably 76 or 77. This means that for nearly 5 decades, 50 years, this country has technically been in some form of a state of emergency. That is to say, some Americans have lived their entire lives under emergency rule?
Yeah, so think about this new pandemic treaty or the IHR amendments and how they can wiggle in all of these little things that they want to do that are devious. So just apply this situation to that situation as well.
That's exactly what the WHO is doing. That's what the international health regulations, these amendments to the IHR, that's what it's going to do. Right now, they're just deciding how much power they want to have. Because they've already got the members, they've already got the United States on the hook, right? There's nothing that...
they're full bore, like creating a new bureaucracy.
Yeah, there's nothing that the United States can do to say, well, we're just going to say no. No, when we became a member state of the World Health Organization and began paying our dues, that means that we're bound to follow their dictates.
Right, and the Biden administration is fully on board with it, and we know that.
Right, and so that's what we're really saying here. If we had a president that just said no, right, and pulled us out of it, no worries, right? But that's not what we have. It doesn't matter. I'd be interested to see what DeSantis would do on this, but I don't know. I don't trust him either. I don't trust any of them at this point, right? You can't say it's a progressive Democrat thing because Donald Trump is the guy who declared
Operation Warp Speed,
and he declared the national emergency. Yeah. Well, some Americans have lived their entire lives under emergency rule, and that would be I've lived most of my life. Summer, you've lived all of your life under national emergency.
Feels that way too.
Yeah. And that means they can do just about whatever they want to. It's a bipartisan issue. When these people get access to the levers of power, they have proven that they will do whatever it takes to get more and more of it.
And it also shows how these documents are written and how there's these loopholes that they can get in. You know, they write them in such a way that they can insert what they want as it pleases.
Yeah, no doubt.
So...
yeah, so it gives them, it does extend their power. So should we not educate ourselves and exert our constitutional duty to fight tyranny now? Now that the U.S. presidency has nearly become a monarchy, a dictatorship. Should anyone live their entire lives under emergency rule? That's not what this nation was established for, right? So we know clearly that it's not about emergencies, it's about control and power. Both parties operate under the same principle these days. Win at all cost. Machiavellian for sure. Now, for example, it was a Republican-dominated House might hold hearings on the dangers of emergency powers now, but as that 2020 Congressional Research Service report pointed out, President Trump invoked the National Emergencies Act to declare a national emergency concerning the coronavirus in 2019, or the coronavirus disease 2019. The president subsequently invoked additional national emergency statute. And last year's Democratic majority, we're talking about when the Biden regime came into office, they hosted hearings on abuses of executive authority just days after issuing their own decrees, their own national emergencies under Biden. And the first, you remember, Summer, what the first national emergency that Joe Biden declared was? Does anybody know out there? Raise your hand if you know. You know what it was?
Crickets.
Take a guess. Take a guess. What issue do you think it was that Joe Biden declared a national emergency on first when he went into office? You're going to kick yourself. It's climate emergency, right?
Oh,
he declared
of course. That's just too obvious.
It is. That's right. It's too obvious. You're like, surely not, but that's it. As soon as he got into office, he declared a national climate emergency with unilateral power over wide areas of our life, over the planet, and our freedom.
Right, because, it does make sense that as Trump is on his way out with Operation Warp Speed, then, of course, Biden comes in with climate change.
And it all builds. It all builds on the other, right? Mm-hmm. So Biden's made a habit of rule by decree. Some do it more than others, and Biden certainly has, or the people that control Joe Biden have made a habit of it. But here's the scary thing about this. Joe Biden was able to declare a national climate emergency with no debate. No debate. Just sign the paper and it's in.
Yeah, and with this climate action as well, when we come back to the issue of the pandemic treaty and the IHR amendments, how they're rolling this into the One Health. So this is their ability to track and trace animals and plants, and so all of that can be wrapped into this scenario as well.
Yeah,
with
the
the
One Health.
the climate lockdowns and such.
It's got three elements, right? The One Health. It's animals, people, and the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can go to your doctor. You can take your dog, and you and your dog can go to the same doctor.
Can get some medical care together.
Go to the same doctor. And it might just be that the doctor, your and your dog's doctor might also be what, a game warden or something like that. That's how crazy it is now.
Yeah, because humans are hackable animals.
Neil Gorsuch recently warned in a statement about the growing use of emergency authority to impose policies. He said, quote, if emergency decrees promise to solve some problems, they threaten to generate others, and rule by indefinite emergency edict risks leaving all of us with a shell of a democracy and civil liberties just as hollow, unquote. So everybody recognizes the danger inherent in allowing presidents to rule like kings. The divine right of kings is the way it was back in the Middle Ages. Invoking emergency powers today is how they can do that. Emergency powers that never go away. To deal with emergencies that often constitute nothing more than the prospect of losing a vote. Powers crafted to fight wars are now used to ride roughshod over opposing opinions, or just for convenience, because it's easier to sign executive orders than it is to actually win a debate. For Joe Biden. Advanced planning for emergencies is prudent, and there is nothing inherently problematic about drafting orders and directives in advance of foreseeable crises, the Brennan Center's Goitein added during this year's testimony. But emergencies cannot justify unconstitutional measures planning to violate the Constitution or ignoring statutory limitations. That is a grotesque abuse of power. Unfortunately, as much as they know it's a problem, America's politicians seem to rather like living in a permanent state of emergency. I ask you, how do you like it? How do you like living in a permanent state of emergency? Go ahead in the comments under this video in the chat right now. Let us know. Do you notice anything different about living under a permanent state of emergency? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. If you're like my lovely wife, Summer, you've always lived under a state of emergency. Okay, the first emergency was declared, I guess, at least in 1976. So I would have been 5. So I don't remember a life without being under a state of emergency. So we'll put it that way too. So you can check on our Substack. Is that right? Am I saying it right? I get Subsplash and Substack.
Substack, and it's also on the mobile app as well.
Exactly. Come to our mobile app. Sign up, download the mobile app, folks. You can see these articles there. You can get it on Substack. It's an article by, look at that, that's by Summer Black, president of Armor of Truth. Tracking dystopia. Whenever you see us label a video or an article tracking dystopia, you know it's going to be about it's going to be about the New World Order. That's really what tracking dystopia means, is that we're looking around for things that are just blatantly about the new order being established. All right. So here's that. I'll share a little bit of this article with you. Let's see. In the name of peace and safety, these technocratic totalitarians and their government and corporate cronies are using the fear of death and the public's ignorance of their own rights and systems of government to sequester the world in their dystopian system of neo-feudalism, to control every economy, every government, to enrich themselves. Now, at this point, we're talking about, what the World Health Organization is attempting to do. So basically, it's like it's the United Nations. These new Babylonites that are gathered now in Geneva or Central and Western Europe, building their new tower, trying to unify everything under their control, to control it all, to erode the freedoms and the quality of lives of people everywhere. But of course, it's for the greater good. This is something known as loosely. I got this from I forgot his name. Live Not by Light. Rod Dreher, from Rod Dreher. The term therapeutic totalitarianism, right? It's not the jackboot style. It's when things are done for the greater good, right? We're protecting you by putting you in a cage. It's therapeutic. Public health emergency declarations provide a smokescreen, and they instill a sense of, please help us. Our lives are more important than our freedom within the people of the world. It's the perfect opportunity to subvert due process, civil liberties, and transparency, which happens to be the very foundations of constitutional government. So, this is the point. Constitutional limits are a thorn in the side of the post-communism ruling class. So, the United Nations and its sub-agencies like the WHO profess to be the world's watchdogs for human rights violations. However, the actions indicate that they are leveraging public health emergencies not only to sidestep, but to trample on fundamental human rights such as freedom of speech, assembly, and privacy, sidestepping individual liberties under the guise of crisis management. They perpetuate a culture of unchecked authority. In other words, these leaders are living by lies, and as such are completely unreliable and not trustworthy for anything. Now that piece there had to do, right, Summer, we're talking about being double-minded.
Yes.
Right? In the first chapter of James, it talks about being double-minded, and that what it means there is when you hold opposing opinions. Specifically in James, it's talking about you hold knowledge of God's will here, or you're trying to live out two things that are in contradiction. You know God's will is this, but you're trying to live out the opposite of that. So this is double-mindedness, right? And a person, it says in the Bible that a person who is double-minded is unstable in all his ways. This means that he's not reliable, not a reliable person. And so this concept works beyond that context as well. These people are liars, and as you'll hear a little bit later when we talk about Niccolò Machiavelli, he said that that's how a ruler should be. He should be able to be good on one day and be evil on another day, whatever the circumstance requires. That would be double-mindedness. A person who does that, who can do that, is not someone you could ever trust. The same malfeasance with the WHO and its delegates and experts today, the manipulation of emergency powers to evade legislative scrutiny and oversight, has been a common tactic in the United States for decades, as we've already pointed out. Bypassing the essential role of elected representatives to shape public policies according to the will of the people and within constitutional constraints. Certain officials are far too often tossing ethics out the window and resort to cronyism. Now there's Machiavelli again, talking about ethics. It's been a common view among political philosophers that there exists a special relationship between moral goodness and legitimate authority. Right? The use of political power has always been thought rightful if it's exercised by a ruler whose personal moral character is strictly virtuous. It used to be the case that virtue was what we aspired to be morally good, for people to see us as morally good, to really be morally good. It was thought that rulers did well when they did good. They earned the right to be leaders. They earned the right to be obeyed and respected inasmuch as they showed themselves to be virtuous and morally upright. Niccolò Machiavelli criticizes this. He says, no, This moralistic view of authority is wrong. In direct opposition to a moralistic theory of politics, Machiavelli says that the only real concern of the political ruler is the acquisition and maintenance of power, although he talks less about power per se than about maintaining the state, right? The state must be maintained at all costs, even if you have to lie, even if you have to deceive. I'll share some more of that about virtue and all that a little bit later. So this double-mindedness also undermines the judicial branch's ability to provide the proper check on these governmental actions. So violations of basic rights perpetrated during public health emergencies often go unchallenged, and that's what we see. Nobody's challenging this stuff. They go unpunished, right? Nobody, no one, no public official, no pharmaceutical head is ever going to face justice. They're not. Justice is not going to be carried out. Not in this life. Not in this world anyway. But it will be carried out. But according to our justice system, they're not going to be punished. And that destroys the confidence of the governed, of the people. And it undermines the effectiveness of the courts to uphold the Constitution. Preventing this particular abuse of power is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. The definitions are not clear. What is an emergency? Who decides? The determination is almost always arbitrary. As we said already, every year in the United States, many national emergencies are renewed. Emergencies that directly affect constitutional rights of citizens. So we already talked about the number, how many there are. But let's talk a little bit more about that national emergency from 2001. The national emergency with respect to persons who commit, threaten to commit, or support terrorism was declared by President George W. Bush on September 14, 2001 in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. This national emergency has been renewed every year, as we said, since its initial declaration. That's 22 straight renewals. Shortly after its declaration in 2001 came the enactment of the most Orwellian policy we've ever seen. The United States, or the USA Patriot Act, right, of 2001, which was signed into law by President George W. Bush on October 26, 2001. So September 14th, 3 days after the attacks, the national emergency was declared. All right, and then about a month and a half later, the USA Patriot Act was signed into law. So, wasn't the emergency already over by then, right? The attacks had happened. What was the national emergency at that point, right? Wasn't the threat long gone by the end of October? The purpose of these declarations is to make possible that which would not normally be possible or constitutional, like presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Habeas corpus. That is fundamental. That is a fundamental constitutional right for Americans. But, for example, normally if you get arrested in America, the police cannot hold you for more than a day without charging you with some crime. That emergency declaration that's been renewed every year for 22 years opened the way to give law enforcement and intelligence agencies enhanced capabilities to arrest and detain American citizens indefinitely without charging them with any crime. This was done because there was an emergency called terrorism. Expanded surveillance powers overrode many personal rights, like the right to not be searched without a proper warrant. Because of the declaration of an emergency, the information of American citizens could be acquired and shared among various government agencies. They said it would prevent terrorist financing. But what it did was give the government the ability under emergency powers to access the financial records and bank accounts of Americans without a warrant from a judge. This was the moment when the beast called national security, or the beast called the national security state, really got its teeth. It gave the NSA enhanced and extended powers to listen to any phone call, read any email, or gain access to anyone's email online or their online accounts. Right? To combat terrorism, of course. In reality, it was just another milepost on the superhighway to slavery. But did it work? The proof is in the pudding. Did it work? Did the national emergency with respect to persons who threaten, or support terrorism, blah, 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 of 2001, did it actually help stop terrorism? Well, once again, definitions are a problem, like nailing Jell-O to the wall. The term terrorism or terror, what is that? How do you define it? It's not explicitly outlined in the Emergency Declaration itself or in the Patriot Act. However, under U.S. law, terrorism generally refers to premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against civilians or non-combatants with the intention of instilling fear, coercion, or influencing government policies through intimidation. Summer, I'll tell you, by that definition, it seems clear to me that the real terrorists are the ones responsible for declaring these emergencies for political or financial gain or for expanded power over the people, right? Right. One of the definitions of terrorism is.
Why don't you say that word a few more times?
Well, it's video. Yeah. So, by the way, folks, we'll go ahead and ask you now. Please just share this video as widely as you can because the algorithm is just not going to send this thing anywhere. Dude, I've said that word. They're just not going to do it anyway. So the Global Terrorism Index, the GTI, which is published annually by the Institute for Economics and Peace, provides comprehensive data on terrorism worldwide. According to the GTI, after 2001, global terrorism declined, of course, right? Because the USA Patriot Act, right? No. After 2001, according to their own data, global terrorism incidents and fatalities increased significantly, particularly during the early years following 9/11. Global terror peaked in 2014 with the highest level of terrorism in terms of incidents and fatalities recorded between 2001 and 2019. In the United States, under the ostensible protections of the Patriot Act and the yearly renewal of that national emergency to stop domestic terrorism, with greater police powers, expanded surveillance, and the people giving up certain freedoms to be safer. Well, the U.S. saw, of course, more internal violence and acts of domestic terrorism than ever. Several major terrorist attacks occurred between 2001 and 2019, including the 2013 Boston Marathon. We won't say the word, but, explosion. And innumerable mass, I can't do it. I just got to say the words. This is silly, right? So the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing and the innumerable mass shootings, school shootings, bombing, cars and trucks being driven into crowds, all of these things happened after the Patriot Act. So what was it for? Since the national emergency with respect to persons who threaten to commit, or support terrorism of 2001 was declared with Bush, Obama, and now Biden presiding over this perpetual emergency that is supposed to prevent, I forgot Trump too, that it's supposed to prevent these things that could cause terrorism. All we've seen is a massive influx of military-aged men crossing into America at the southern border, specifically from the Middle East and China. So what are we doing? National emergencies are clearly used as a context for gaining authority that would otherwise be unlawful and for gaining political advantage. Right? That is, really, you have to be careful with this kind of thing. But that is really what what we've seen from this Biden administration since they got in there. Their national emergencies all play a role in keeping those people in power. But now we're seeing the fruits of those seeds planted in 2001 and earlier. It's become clear to anyone paying a moderate amount of attention that the emergencies being declared today for extensions of power and political advantage are about fear of illness. It's about safety. They spend money and effort in media to get you afraid and then come in and say, hey, we'll solve it for you. We'll take your fear away. But they never do. In 2001, the emergency declarations tightened the government's grip on citizens and created an opportunity through conflicts of interest for many military contractors to make billions of dollars on the global war on terror. Today, the noose is tighter, and the new market for extracting billions from the global population is pandemic products, a brand new market, such as vaccines, antivirals, tests, masks, many other items, but also the discovery of new viruses. Today, that is called intellectual property. That will be worth billions. Jane Ellison, a former World Health Organization director, speaking on a WHO working group live stream in July of last year, looking ahead to the World Health Assembly that just happened last May, announced that after rigorous studies, she was very happy to report that the member states and private donors could make a 35-to-1 return on their investment through the World Health Organization's Sustainable Financing Initiative. She continued saying that was a conservative number. It could be as high as 50-to-1. Now, how can anyone guarantee a return on investment, especially 35-to-1, 50-to-1, because they will control the market. That's how they can make, and she didn't have any problem saying it out in the public. So we've got that. We need.
That was a jaw dropper.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that was a jaw dropper when we heard that.
She just gave it away.
We were going through the videos that they'll just have these videos and sit there and talk amongst themselves and then post it online. And if you can bear to sit through it, you will find gems like that.
Yeah, nothing's hidden today. You just have to be
willing to put in the time.
You have to look. Yeah. So the World Health Organization says that a new growth market is pandemic products, and those who have the privilege to invest, well, it's the Bill Gates Foundation and others, they will make, at the very least, $35 for every dollar they invest.
And by the way, I mean, is that even true? You know what I mean? So that, yeah, they're gonna say that, and everybody's gonna be like, yeah, I want in on that. And then at the end of the day, like, what will their return on investment actually be? So there's also that.
Well, yeah, they're gonna get massive return on investment anyway. But with that information, just hand it over to the public. Do you see any incentive there for anyone to declare some kind of emergency? Right? Do you see any incentive for the World Health Organization to declare emergencies? That's what she was talking about. You will get a 35-to-1 or maybe even a 50-to-1 return on your investment through our sustainable financing program. And the way we're going to make money, pandemic products. How do we make money on pandemic products? We declare emergencies. So
not just pandemic products, but everything related to the pandemic industry, right? So we're talking about that One Health system as well with the triple bottom line.
Yeah. The corporate mafia has captured the World Health Organization, and the dawn of the day is Gates, right? He's that guy. So to stop this, what do we need? You got to have robust mechanisms for transparency and accountability. It's absolutely necessary. Governments must ensure that emergency measures are enacted with clear guidelines, right? This is what we should demand of, first of all, our own representatives, and we should demand that they demand it of the WHO or the United Nations or anyone else that has the opportunity to control anything, that has the opportunity to do what they're doing. It should be required that they provide regular reports to everyone, all the member states, all the people that it affects. And we need straightforward definitions. Define emergency so that you can't go outside of those parameters, right? We're done with this, right? 2001, that national emergency, the USA Patriot Act, there's no definition of terrorist. It's whatever, right? If you're a political opponent, you can be designated as a terrorist. It's just silly. Clear and reasonable time frames, right, for emergencies. We need to have, if we're going to have emergency powers, they need to expire and not be renewable. Automatic expiration of emergency powers, right? It should be open to public scrutiny, right? Like the International Health Regulations amendments. Right. The fact that they don't make that available for you to see,
and by
is
the
all
way,
you need to know.
I was just going to mention, just reiterate, we've said it before on a show from the past, but like it was China and the U.S. that decided that they didn't want to have those amendments. Like they didn't want it public. They didn't want it put out in the public. It was China and the U.S. And then meanwhile, we're supposed to believe that China and the U.S. are enemies.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous.
Well, they're writing their own format for global government. They're writing their own new form of government for full spectrum dominance over the earth and all its creatures, which would give them control of every financial market on earth too. That's, of course, why wouldn't they do it? The WHO, through the IHR focal points, right? That's what you call the IHR, or the International Health Regulation focal points. That is the delegate in each nation who will be responsible for the implementation of the regulations. In other words, enforcement, right? They will have the broad ability to control everyone and everything through the declaration of emergencies. But the kicker is this: potential emergencies. That's the language that we've seen so far. Even potential emergencies. They will have the authority to lock down the world or a region or a nation simply because there's the possibility of an emergency. And of course, emergency, as we've said, isn't defined and clear. In fact, emergency could be misinformation, right? An emergency could be what we're saying here today, right? They've called it the infodemic, an information emergency, right? Welcome to brave new 1984 land. You got something?
Oh, I was just going to say, and also like James Roguski, he has a YouTube channel, and he puts on like the different roundtables and talks and stuff like that. He goes through some of these videos that we've gone through as well. Yeah. And when you hear the different representatives who are talking for the member states, it's basically like they've all just been handed a sheet to read. Like they just sit there and they read their list of talking points, and you can tell that it's all written by the same author. Like it's the same jargon, it's the same buzzwords, all of it. So it's quite easy to see that this is just a performance. It's like, okay, we're gonna look like we're doing some sort of democracy, but really it's just like people. So from Nigeria, they would be saying this, and then from Venezuela, they'd be saying that, for example. But you can't help but notice that it sounds like it's written by the same author, no matter who's speaking. So,
yeah, they're repeating it. Yeah, this is an example of that. The Office of Global Affairs listening session. So, I'm not. This could be like the Delphi technique, but this is, there are opportunities. This is James spoke on this, and this was Office of Global Affairs, right? You got to give your, and most of the people that showed up on here were just hammering the pandemic treaty. They were, and nobody knows it's happening, right? No media is covering this, nothing like that at all. So preserving constitutional limits on government power is paramount, particularly during public health emergencies. Abuse of power by corrupt officials, elected and unelected, is counter to the World Health Organization's original mission. And of course, it's un-American, and it threatens the very fabric of democracy and individual freedoms. So by speaking out, not just by speaking out, but speaking out the right way, going through the proper channels, which James Roguski gives you, and advocating for transparency and accountability, strengthened oversight, judicial review. That's how we safeguard our constitutional heritage. That's how we ensure that no crisis becomes an opportunity or an excuse for authoritarians to overreach their limits. So we must unite in demanding accountability and speaking out loudly and often that we will not tolerate tyrants, tools of abuse, and cronies taking advantage of humanity's inherent fears and the perversion of emergency powers for their own purposes. We must take responsibility and return the instruments of public welfare, democratic resilience to the people, right? That's a biblical concept. That is something that we as Christians should get involved with, right? Collaboration between civil society organizations, human rights advocates, and international bodies is also crucial. Through the sharing of information, documenting the mistakes that the WHO makes, or documenting abuses, and exerting diplomatic pressure, we can create a global movement that discourages this kind of abuse of power and the perversion of public health. So really it's about raising public awareness, and if you go to these sites that we've given you here, you'll find ways, you'll find the opportunities where he's even got email templates that say what needs to be said, and then he's got the email addresses and the physical addresses of your representatives, the people who represent you in your area. No excuse. It's all been done there for you.
Yeah, and he's got, this is worldwide as well, so he's got all sorts of resources for people around the globe, not just the U.S.
Yeah. Let me remind you right now, folks, if you don't mind, please download that Armor of Truth mobile app. All right, it's available at the App Store. It's available on Google Play, and you will find all kinds of features there, some fun stuff. You'll find a direct link to wherever our live stream is. We send out a notification before we go live, wherever we go live. And whenever we put up a video or a podcast, we let you know through the app. Get exclusive content like the James Bible Study podcast that's available there now, and a new podcast that Summer and myself are going to be doing, which is the Tracking Dystopia podcast, where we will be able to speak more freely as we like, in fact, on that podcast. You'll find that only on the Armor of Truth mobile app. So look, if we've earned your trust, folks, please like this video. Just click the thumbs up right now. Go ahead, click that thing. Subscribe if you haven't. Be sure to share, make a comment, engage with it, because that really does make a difference, right? It helps. If you've been blessed by our work in any way, please let us know. Email us at hello@armoroftruth.net, because we really love to hear from you. More than anything else, more than ever, we need your prayers. And so please help us out with prayers. And grassroots movements still work, folks. Strength in numbers. So please, if you can, partner with us today to ensure that we'll still be here in 2024. And if you're struggling to get by, don't send your money to us. Support your local church first, always. Our work's always going to be free for anyone who wants to watch or listen. That's our commitment to the Lord, because He's always been so good to us. So if you can, support Armor of Truth financially. Every little bit helps. Don't think you have to donate a big amount. Every little bit helps. And you can use the Armor of Truth mobile app to do it very easily. Or you can visit our website or follow the links below this video. If you're able to set up a recurring, a monthly donation to AOT, that really helps us a lot with planning for the future of Armor of Truth. You might not realize it, but since we're a public organization and having pledges or a lot of supporters who are willing to make recurring donations makes others more likely to support as well, because it demonstrates that we're consistent, that we have loyal base of support. So download the mobile app today. It's free. What do you think, Summer?
Yes, please do.
Also, please subscribe to our backup YouTube channel, True Normal TV, and visit the Armor of Truth website, specifically right now for the Culture Vault. It'll be the first thing that shows up. Summer does a lot of a lot of work in keeping all kinds of articles. Some of them will be about what's happening in the world, and much of it will be edifying content for you. Like what's the one you've got up there today, or one from 1 week ago, The Way of Lament? Do you remember that post?
Yeah. Let's see.
We've also got this series here. We've also got our Alcoholics Anonymous, the truth about AA and 12-step programs. You can check that out there too. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way of lament. So it's just we've always tried to talk about lamenting to the Lord, that when we're going through really hard times and we're feeling low, that we should cry out to God and throw our cares on him and not be shy about that we don't have to come to the Lord all put together. We should lament to the Lord. And so this is a further study on the process of lamenting. And it's a good one.
Yeah, if you're a mess, you can come to the Lord in a mess. It's not like he doesn't know, and you should. Well, thanks for that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, to give you an example of what some of this looks like in our world right now, Missouri versus Biden. This is a case right now. This case is instrumental in grasping the nature of government censorship in the information age. This also has to do with emergency powers, because when these emergencies are declared, they can do all kinds of things to shut down, as you heard earlier, shut down radio stations, television stations, and surely that extends out to now social media. They've done all kinds of things with this cybersecurity. What was it called? Do you remember? Some kind of cybersecurity act, which had provisions to shut down anybody who says anything that rubs them the wrong way. It's a very important milestone in our fight to secure our own human rights and recover our republic from the clutches of the dastardly elites and cold corporate shills who work hand in glove with organizations and agencies like the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and the entire New York to Geneva organized crime racket that is insisting that the only answer to the polycrisis of pandemics, bank failures, supply chain breakdowns, food shortages, cybercrime, racism, misinformation, and hate speech is for them to take over the world and exert full spectrum dominance through global totalitarianism, which they call safety, inclusivity, equality. Everybody with a pulse knows good and well they created every one of those crises. Nevertheless, they power onward with a game plan of not jackboots, but psychological warfare, biological warfare, and of course, thought control. And that's what this Missouri versus Biden case is about. The background of this case is in 2021, a Missouri court declared that the Wuhan coronavirus mandates and restrictions imposed by the whims of public health bureaucrats are illegal. That was in Missouri. Missouri versus Biden was filed on May 5th, 2022. Now, we have to give credit here to Tracy Beans, editor-in-chief of Uncovered DC. And you find her on Twitter. And you can get linked up to her wherever her news feeds are from there. She's an investigative journalist, says committed to a revival of ethical journalism. Been in action since the good old days, 2012 to 2015 era, when YouTube was the champion for truth at first. Strange to say that now, but she's built a deep following of over 1 million readers and listeners across platforms. So, check that out. The plaintiffs, including the states of Missouri and Louisiana, asked the court for expedited discovery to obtain a limited set of evidence and depositions from certain individuals. They argued that this evidence would allow them to make the case for a temporary injunction to stop the government from infringing on freedom of speech or First Amendment rights of plaintiffs and their citizens. That's from Uncover DC. The judge granted the motion for expedited discovery and depositions, prompting a fight between the government and the judge. In this case, Judge Terry Doty. In short, the defendants want to stop the defendants being Joe Biden, the government, the federal government, they want to stop all discovery and certain plaintiffs from being deposed. Why? Well, they don't want to do it because they say it would endanger these public officials. The initial complaint has been amended 3 times due to the overwhelming evidence of broad harm to the constitutional rights of all Americans. The case has most recently been amended into a class action lawsuit. And really what it's saying is the U.S. government is saying that it owns your thoughts, right? They've really said this. They call it cognitive infrastructure. The things you say online, the government says they own. They literally think they own your thoughts. Cognitive infrastructure. We're beyond Orwell. We're into something else now. You can learn more about this. You can check out, the credit for this report comes from citizens.news, right? And globalism.news. You can find more reports on this. But the fight is to hold on. The fight is on to hold the United States government responsible for colluding with social media companies to censor you and me and our free speech rights online. Plaintiffs, including the states of Missouri and Louisiana, push for expedited discovery to obtain this information, and of course that set off the war. All right, so that's one example. And there's another one. There's an exclusive. Let's see. Here it is. Right here. Exclusive. Michigan law will criminalize Christianity and free speech. Matt DePerno expressed deep concerns about the broad and subjective nature of this legislation. He argued that it could potentially criminalize speech that expresses conservative or religious beliefs, and even public teaching or broadcasting of biblical messages or passages of Scripture. Right? They could shut down our ability to read the Bible on the internet. For instance, pastors who mention the LGBTQ community could be considered guilty of a felony, as their words could be interpreted as causing offense or intimidation. Right? So basically what that means is that if you say that is sin, you're intimidating. You're offending somebody. My friends, here's the truth. Here's the truth about it all. The gospel is offensive. It is offensive to the world. It is offensive to the natural man. It is offensive to the person who is not saved. The gospel is offensive. So let's make sure we understand that right up front. But it is not intimidation. And it is not offensive in the way that they mean. The gospel is offensive to people because it tells them the truth about who they are. It tells them the truth about what's going to happen to them. The removal of specific intent and the focus on how the victim feels, rather than a clearly defined criminal act, were seen as significant departures from the previous law. So some of the implications of this, the potential penalties under the proposed legislation include imprisonment, fines, or alternative sentences. But imprisonment is there. Alternative sentences such as community service and mandated government brainwashing programs, re-education. What was that? You had some, what was the other day where we had an example of a re-education system. I forget. I shouldn't have brought it up because I know we. Well,
that was a while ago, right?
Yeah, it was something. I don't know. It was last week. We were looking at something. It was during our break here that we were. But what we're seeing is more and more examples of when someone violates these arbitrary policies here. They have places now. They have things that you like. So let's say I was to get charged with offending an LGBTQ person from what I say on here. Today, instead of going to prison or being fined, I could, they probably would make this offer to everybody. You could go to a class, right? You could go to a class once or twice a week where they'll teach you how to be sensitive to everyone, I guess. Oh, what a fun time that would be.
I think that's what's happening in Australia. That's what they're facing at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, re-education camps. We've seen that.
Like they've got a bill that's on the table that would potentially, stifle their freedom of speech. So that's what they're going through right now.
Well, it's weaponizing the government against the people, and as promised, they're weaponizing the Department of Health and Human Services. This is the militarization of the U.S. executive agencies after they grabbed power, like after the Biden regime came into power. They started a process of militarizing U.S. executive agencies. In other words, federal bureaucrats are amassing firepower. So Javier Becerra, Secretary of Health and Human Services, his organization would be the one, right? This is the organization, this is the agency where that IHR focal point for the pandemic treaty would come to him. Because when a public health emergency is declared, the Secretary of Health and Human Services has amazing power. He can tell the president what to do. So, but it's deeper, it's even worse, right? How bad is it? Let's take a look. They are weaponizing absolutely everything. They're weaponizing the government, of course. They're weaponizing the church. They're weaponizing the legal system. They're weaponizing the economy. They're weaponizing healthcare, border patrol. So this is at openthebooks.com. Openthebooks.com. And the title of this piece is The Militarization of the U.S. Executive Agencies. Over the past couple of decades, the size, scope, and power of the federal government has dramatically grown. There are 458 Special Office of Inspector General agents within Health and Human Services, armed with sophisticated weaponry and trained by military special forces contractors. Are you hearing me right now? The Department of Health and Human Services, the department that, if a pandemic treaty was to be enacted, if that was to be done, this would be the agency that would be responsible for enforcing lockdowns. And they're being armed and trained by military special forces contractors. No tinfoil hat here. These are just the facts. But these security forces pale in comparison to the Department of Homeland Security, of course. The DHS owns 259,891 guns, not including the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, the administration, the TSA, the ones who check you out before you get on the plane. They don't disclose how many weapons they have. But as we've reported here, the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, what do they need to be armed for? Why do they need 5 million rounds of ammunition? Why did the Department of Health and Human Services purchase 4 million rounds over the last 8 years and stockpile 5 submachine guns? It sounds like a joke, but sadly it's not. And what about the 800,000 rounds purchased by the Social Security Administration? Conservatives argue that it's hypocritical for political leaders to criticize private gun ownership while simultaneously equipping non-military agencies with hollow point bullets and military-style equipment. OpenTheBooks.com is dedicated to bringing this information into the public square so we can become a more informed electorate. Top takeaways from this information, my friends, is this. Between 2006 and 2019, 103 federal agencies outside of the Department of Defense spent nearly $3 billion on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. Nearly $1 billion of that was between 2015 and 2019 alone. So it's increasing as time goes on. Between 2015 and 2019, 76 administrative agencies spent $110 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. 27 traditional law enforcement agencies spent $800 million on guns, ammo, and military-style equipment. Examples: the FBI, Customs and Border Patrol, ICE, Bureau of Prisons, U.S. Marshal Service, the ATF, and the Secret Service. What's the problem? Sloppy controls. In the most recent audit, it's a 3-year period. They get audited on a 3-year period. The Department of Homeland Security lost 230 guns. DHS also lost nearly 2,000 badges and 25 secure immigration stamps. These are things terrorists could use. Right? This is silly. It's silly to see these emergencies and these declarations and these new laws that are meant to protect you, and this is what it really looks like behind the scenes. Between 2006 and 2019, the IRS, with its nearly 2,200, over 2,000 special agents, spent over $21 million on guns, ammo, and military-style equipment. The IRS stockpiled 4,500 guns and 5 million rounds of ammo. Take this into consideration. There are 200,000 federal officers with arrest and firearm authority, right? So in like the IRS and Department of Health and Human Services, these kinds of agencies and the others, there are 200,000 federal officers like this with authority to arrest you, with authority to carry a firearm and use it against you. 200,000 of them. How many Marines do we have? Less. We have 182,000 U.S. Marines. So we have more federal agents than we have actual Marines. New York Post reported that the IRS spent $10 million on weapons, ammo, and combat gear since 2020. And speaking of the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense, we talked about that earlier, countermeasures. They ordered countermeasures from the pharmaceutical industry. What is a countermeasure? Just as a definition for you, a countermeasure is a military term that they used for medical technology, for the vaccines. But by definition, a countermeasure, this is what the DOD called it. I'm not making it up. That's what they called it. When they ordered it from Pfizer, they said countermeasures. It's a military term that refers to an action or strategy taken to prevent, mitigate, or neutralize a threat or an enemy's capabilities. Countermeasures are implemented with the aim. The purpose is to enhance one's own defensive or offensive posture and to reduce the effectiveness of an adversary's tactics, weapons, or systems. So the question here is, who is the enemy? Who is the enemy? Well, I have to say with DHS, Department of Homeland Security, the IRS, all of these agencies arming up, I think we're the enemies. I don't think the virus was the enemy. I think the people were the enemy. That's why they ordered countermeasures and not cures. These measures are typically designed to disrupt, deceive, or disable the enemy's capabilities while preserving the operational capabilities and security of friendly forces. Countermeasures can take various forms depending on the specific threat being addressed. They may include defensive measures like fortifications, barriers, hardening of targets to protect against enemy attacks. Or countermeasures could be electronic countermeasures. They involve the use of electronic devices and techniques to disrupt or deceive enemy sensors. Enemy sensors like your eyes and your ears, communication systems, or guided weapons. Examples of ECM include jamming radar, or jamming radio signals, or employing decoys to confuse enemy tracking systems. In addition, countermeasures can encompass offensive actions aimed at neutralizing or destroying the enemy's capabilities before they can be deployed effectively. These may involve preemptive strikes, sabotage, or covert operations to disrupt or dismantle enemy infrastructure, logistics, or command and control systems. Countermeasures are an integral part of military planning and operations. That's what the Department of Defense does. They play a crucial role in enhancing force protection, maintaining operational security, and gaining a tactical and strategic advantage over their adversaries. Who are their adversaries? Is it us? Are we the adversaries? Niccolo Machiavelli was a 16th century political philosopher. His famous statement from his book, The Prince, is that ends justify the means. That encapsulates the central idea in his message, in his philosophy that's become almost standard today. According to Machiavelli, and many, all right, you'll hear people talk about Saul Alinsky and Rules for Radicals as being, that was Hillary Clinton's mentor, and the people in office today, they see Saul Alinsky as, a prophet, and they are his disciples, and that's true. Saul Alinsky is the one who he wrote Rules for Radicals. It's basically a handbook on revolution from the progressive point of view. But before that, there was Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli. He says the primary goal of the ruler or the prince is to maintain and consolidate political power, to maintain it, to keep it, to consolidate it, to centralize it. In this pursuit, it is acceptable and sometimes necessary to employ any means or methods regardless of morality or ethical considerations. In Machiavelli's view, the ruler should prioritize the acquisition and preservation of power above all else, even if it requires deception, manipulation, violence, or other morally questionable tactics. And we're not just talking about war with an enemy here. He's talking about on your own people. He believed that in the pursuit of political objectives, the ruler should be willing to set aside traditional moral norms. Be willing to set aside any constraints, any moral constraints that might hinder their effectiveness, or that might compromise their ability to govern effectively. In essence, Machiavelli emphasized that the ruler should be pragmatic, and that's the idea. It's cold pragmatism. It's demonic. Right? Demons are cold and pragmatic. They have a purpose, and they achieve their purpose. The ruler should be pragmatic and focused on achieving the desired outcome, regardless of the methods used. The morality of actions is secondary, not even secondary, to the pursuit and maintenance of the state, the maintenance of power. By justifying the means through the ends, Machiavelli advocated for a realpolitik approach to politics. Now, what that means, realpolitik approach, is it's detached from ethics, no ethical considerations, and it emphasizes practicality. It emphasizes the ruler's self-interest. Today, this is a political approach and doctrine that we see all around us. It prioritizes pragmatics over all else. And when we mean pragmatics, it means achieving their goals. The pursuit of concrete and tangible goals like territorial expansion, economic advantage, right, to create a new market for pandemic products, to take full spectrum dominance over the planet, that would be an economic advantage. Or the preservation of national security, of course we hear that one used, rather than adherence to abstract moral principles. We don't need those, right? That gets in the way of us maintaining the state. Even if it involves compromises, strategic maneuvering, and deception against the state's own people. The focus is on achieving favorable outcomes, maintaining or enhancing power and influence in the global arena. For example, Otto von Bismarck did this. He used this approach to unify Germany in the late 19th century. And it became particularly relevant during the Cold War as states navigated the ideological divide between the United States and the Soviet Union. Machiavelli's ideas were revolutionary for his time as he challenged prevailing notions of political morality that placed emphasis on virtues such as justice, compassion, and integrity. We don't have time for justice, compassion, and integrity. We have to expand our power. That's the goal. His work sparked intense debate, of course, and has had a lasting impact on political thought. In fact, I haven't researched it yet, but I am curious to find out what an effect Machiavelli had on Saul Alinsky. We'll get back to you on that at some point. So you might hear someone use the term Machiavellian when they talk about a politician or Klaus Schwab or somebody like that. Well, it means unscrupulous and cunning behavior, right? It means lying and deceiving to get what you need. As I said earlier, the idea of virtue used to be, it was something that men aspired to be virtuous, to be morally good, to be transparent, moral goodness, and that's how men became leaders. Legitimate authority was founded in moral goodness. Machiavelli had a different view on virtue. Well, I'll give you his view last, but just give you an idea of the other ideas of virtue. In Greek philosophy, Plato said that he taught that virtue is knowledge. It's the pursuit of knowledge and education and self-reflection. Aristotle said that virtue is seeking one's highest potential, right, and practical wisdom, personal excellence. That's virtuous. There's some problems with Aristotle too, because he also advocated for something like a master and slave morality. That's Nietzsche. I know that's Nietzsche had the slave morality, but Aristotle believed that some people were born to be slaves. They shouldn't aspire to move on out of their class. But anyway, so that's the Greek position on virtue, right? It's personal excellence. It's you want to aspire to moral goodness. The Christian view on virtue, and we look at for the period here, right? We're talking about the period of Renaissance and before the Enlightenment here. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas. The Christian view of virtue is an emphasis on faith. That means faith meaning trusting God over man. Trusting God is supreme. Emphasis on hope, love, humility, and temperance. Right? Controlling yourself, not lying and stealing and deceiving. It's moral character and righteousness in alignment with God's will and character. Right? The most virtuous man that ever lived is Jesus Christ. And so that is the Christian's example of virtue. And then there's the humanist view of virtue, which is just a rebirth of the Greek idea of virtue. It's the development of good moral character to achieve personal excellence for the good of all. But virtue can't be fully understood apart from the Christian doctrine of original sin. So here's the problem with the idea of virtue in the world today. Without a true anthropology, study of human beings, the study of man, anthropos, that's man, the study of human beings, without a true anthropology, a right understanding of the nature of all human creatures, which is to serve self and habitually sin in thought and deed, without that true anthropology, that biblical anthropology, virtue cannot be truly understood. The epitome or the universal standard for a virtuous man is Jesus Christ, which is to say the character of God. All systems of thought and philosophy will fall short. They will fail to be valid. Apart from the standard of Christ. Full knowledge of Christ, and in addition to that, this is a Summer and I heard this morning in a really good sermon we heard this morning, that the knowledge of Christ cannot be known. Right? We're talking about virtue and that Jesus Christ is the standard. Apart from that, you have a flawed view of virtue. But even that's not enough. Full knowledge of Christ cannot be known unless a man's eyes and mind are opened by the Spirit through the Word. And that's Ephesians 1:18, where Apostle Paul says he wishes that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened. Machiavelli, who has inspired a lot of politicians and world leaders, had a very different view on virtue. Machiavelli said, "One can say this in general of men: they are ungrateful, disloyal, insincere, and deceitful, timid of danger, and avid of profit. Love is a bond of obligation which these miserable creatures break whenever it suits them to do so. But fear holds them fast by a dread of punishment that never passes." Emergencies that never end. Fear. Do you see what we're talking about? This is how governments are ruling today. This is how the United Nations and the World Health Organization, this is how the current regime in the United States of America is operating, by fear. People obey because they fear the consequences of not doing so, whether the loss of life or privileges. A Machiavellian perspective directly attacks the notion of any grounding for authority independent of the sheer possession of power. So, according to Machiavelli, authority is legitimate and it's moral, but power is what works. Power is all that works. So whether or not you have the authority to rule, as long as you have the power and maintain it, that's virtue, according to Machiavelli. For example, in a Machiavellian government, I can only choose not to obey if I possess the power to resist the demands of the state, or if I'm willing to accept the consequences of the state's superiority of coercive force. How do we define liberty and freedom? How do we go about being free men and women today? You have to know what your God-given human rights are and be willing to exert them wherever you are, fearlessly, glorifying God all the while, and be willing to accept the consequences. Because it might be you. You might need to be the one who's burned at the stake for the glory of God. It might be any of us to be thrown in a jail cell, or just to be humiliated publicly, or to have your YouTube channel shut down, or whatever. All manner of persecution, my friends. So according to Machiavelli, virtue is the idea that if a leader can do anything necessary, whether it's immoral or not, to maintain the state. Virtue is a range of personal qualities that the prince or the ruler will find it necessary to acquire in order to maintain the state and achieve great things. Those are the two standard markers of power for Machiavelli. That the ruler is best suited for office, on Machiavelli's account, who is capable of varying his or her conduct from good to evil and back again, as fortune and circumstances dictate. That is the touchstone of political success, being able to be evil if you need to be. So that is, you see, and he talks about fortuna, or fortune. Fortune is the enemy of political order. You'll get it in a second here. The ultimate threat to the safety and security of the state. As with virtue, fortuna is employed by the ruler, or by Machiavelli, in a distinct way. It's not the dictionary definition of the word. Machiavelli's fortune is a malevolent and uncompromising fountain of human misery, affliction, and disaster. That is to say that you've got virtue and fortune, and they oppose each other according to Machiavelli. Virtue is being willing to do whatever it takes, even if it's immoral and heinous, to maintain the state. And fortuna, or fortune, that's acts of God. So virtue is the will of man in Machiavelli's eyes. And fortuna, or fortune, that's the will of God. So you can see he hates God. And he doesn't mind telling you that. He talks about fortuna, or these acts of nature. One of our destructive rivers, which, when it's angry, turns the plains into lakes, throws down the trees and buildings, takes earth from one spot, puts it in another. Everyone flees before the flood. Everyone yields to its fury, and nowhere can repel it. She shows her power where virtue and wisdom do not prepare to resist her, and directs her fury where she knows that no dikes or embankments are ready to hold her. Fortune, or acts of God, or the will of God, may be resisted by human beings where virtue and wisdom have already prepared for her. So you have to prepare, right? This is where humanism goes off the deep end. Political success depends upon appreciation of the operational principles of fortuna. So he says a lot of things that are right. You have to be aware. You have to acknowledge the power of the things you can't control, which in this case would be the will of God. It's better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortuna is a woman, and it is necessary, in order to keep her under, to beat and maul her. This is what we're talking about. This is a mentor, an inspiration of many of our politicians and the globalists today. Fortuna is depicted as a primal source of violence, especially as directed against humanity, or, in his case, this is the will of God he's talking about. He just doesn't like it because sometimes it goes against his will. So he fights against it. He says it's antithetical to reason. Only preparation will ensure victory against the will of God. This is what virtue provides, the ability to respond to fortune, or fortuna, or the will of God, at any time and in any way that is necessary. So as we said, the suspension of commonplace ethics in matters of politics. Moral values have no place in the sorts of decisions that political leaders must make. Machiavelli prefers conformity to moral virtue. Machiavelli rises to the mantle of the founder of modern political science, in contrast with Aristotle's classical norm-laden vision of a political science of virtue. So his idea of virtue counters almost everyone else's idea of virtue. Machiavelli's attitude toward religion in general and Christianity in particular is negative, right? He says conventional Christianity saps from human beings the vigor required for active civil life. So he sees, and according to Machiavelli, and see if this rings a bell to you, to be a scientist or to be a ruler, you have to reject God. You have to reject our religion. Machiavelli was himself profoundly anti-Christian, preferring the pagan civil religions of ancient societies such as Rome. Machiavelli's cosmos, governed by the movements of the stars and the balance of the humors, takes on an essentially pagan and pre-Christian cast. However, as you can see here, central biblical themes do run throughout Machiavelli's writings, as many people we see today as atheists and humanists and evolutionists. They borrow from God constantly. Why should anything good happen? Finding there a coherent conception of a divinely centered and ordered cosmos in which other forces, the heavens or fortuna and the like, are subsumed under a divine will and plan. So one thing that Machiavelli sees is that humanity you can't really trust. So he's perceptive enough to see that truth of depravity that exists, right? The evil that thread of evil that Solzhenitsyn said runs through the hearts of every human being, and you have to know that. That's a proper anthropology. You have to know who you are. That you're not basically good. And Machiavelli seemed to know that. His response to that knowledge was demonic, though. So Machiavelli is credited with this idea of the modern idea of the state, right? If we define the state as an impersonal form of rule possessing a monopoly of coercive authority within a set territorial boundary. Right? So today, the modern state really is about coercion. And it kind of always has been. Machiavelli's influence in shaping a concept called reason of state, that's just what we said earlier. The means, the ends justify the means. That's the reason of state. Whatever it takes to maintain the state. The doctrine that the good of the state itself takes precedence over all other considerations, whether morality or the good of citizens, right? Even over the good of the people. Maintain the state. Or maintain the United Nations. Or maintain their movement. Machiavelli's name and doctrines are widely invoked to justify the priority of the interests of the state in the age of absolutism. This is wrongly attributed to Machiavelli. Absolutism was the age when the divine right of kings, Rex Lex, the king is the law, when the king could dictate at his will. But that's not really what Machiavelli was talking about. He was talking more about the state with a ruler, more of a dictatorship. I would say more to come on Machiavelli and these concepts later on, because I think it's really interesting when we start to understand, right, this Machiavellian idea of virtue, the will of man, and fortuna, the will of God, and as we see our leaders today working against the will of God, going directly against God. We've seen this happen. I mean, some examples of where we see Machiavellianism in the world in the 20th century. The Cold War, The United States and the Soviet Union both employed Machiavellian principles to pursue their national interests, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Wherever you see deception for gain, the rise of dictatorships. In the 20th century, several dictators and authoritarian leaders used Machiavellian tactics to gain and maintain power. Adolf Hitler, for example, employed deception, propaganda, and manipulation to consolidate his rule in Nazi Germany. Joseph Stalin, ruthless tactics and purges, killing human beings, and political repression, all to eliminate potential threats and opposition, to maintain control, maintain the state, even if you have to kill everybody to do it. And the idea of proxy wars. We see these today, right? The war that's going on now in Ukraine. That's really just a proxy war. That's Machiavellian, right? Same thing happened during the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union engaged in proxy wars, supporting and manipulating local actors to advance their own interests without engaging in direct conflict. See, so the United States today is engaged in a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine with their puppet, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's all deception, right? We're told that we have to support Ukraine. Why? Why? Well, because that supports our interests. But it's all about deception. No one's getting the truth. Machiavellian principles were at play as they sought to expand their spheres of influence and weaken their opponents. Soviet Union's support of communist regimes in Vietnam and Cuba, and the United States' involvement in conflicts such as the Korean War, support of anti-communist groups in Latin America. Richard Nixon's involvement in the Watergate scandal demonstrated Machiavellian tactics. The Clintons are as Machiavellian as it gets, right? Whatever it takes to maintain our position, our authority. Nixon's administration engaged in espionage, deception, and attempts to cover up illegal activities, highlighting his Machiavellian approach to preserving power. Corporations, also. In the business world, Machiavellian principles have been employed to gain a competitive edge, and still are. Companies use aggressive tactics, manipulation, strategic alliances to secure market dominance. That is why I'm talking about Machiavelli today. What the World Health Organization is doing through the international health regulations is as Machiavellian as it gets. These tactics of manipulation and making strategic alliances to secure market dominance, hostile takeovers, predatory pricing, the use of political influence to further corporate interests. Politicians often manipulate situations and people to achieve their goals. It's become common, right? Don't you kind of expect that out of the government today? Well, that's not good. That's not where we should be. They make false promises to gain votes. They engage in smear campaigns against their opponents, right? We all expect this now. They lie and they deceive, all in a quest for power, to maintain their position of power. Corporate executives do this. They advance their careers by taking advantage of other people. They manipulate colleagues into doing their own bidding. They exploit subordinates. They engage in power plays and deception. So really it sounds like a psychopath, doesn't it? Psychopaths are Machiavellian. They have no compassion and they exploit others for personal gain, no conscience, no sense of morality, no need for it. We see this in salespeople and marketers, utilizing charisma and strategies of manipulation by making false claims. Vaccine manufacturers hiding important, damaging information, or when they use high-pressure tactics to close deals. Therapists and counselors can be Machiavellian. People who are trained to build trust with others might just use that knowledge of their clients' vulnerabilities to manipulate them or for their own gain. And of course, military leaders manipulate people to gain and maintain power. And the use of propaganda to control the narrative is a Machiavellian principle. To suppress dissent, to lie to the people, or to use force to shut down dissent. All of these things were looked at as negative before Machiavelli. Machiavelli's concepts, and since his time, and it was after he was dead when his book The Prince was actually found popularity. But since then, you'll probably find it on the shelf of every politician you've ever heard of. So basically, it has narcissism at its core. Narcissists believe in their utmost importance. No one's more important than them. And according to Machiavelli, the ruler has to believe that. He has to have a tendency to prioritize their own interests over others, to manipulate people into admiring them, taking advantage of their perceived authority. Right? You hear this. This is the trans movement too, right? Celebrities, influencers, social ladder climbers, manipulating their social circles to gain acceptance, befriending influential people, or engaging in unethical behavior if it can help you achieve your goal or get more views and more clicks. Right? Clickbait is Machiavellian. Manipulating your viewers, your fans, your colleagues, manipulating the media to maintain an image or status, engaging in unethical behavior in private, behind closed doors. Or you see a lot of celebrities and public officials using charm to control the narrative, right? Manipulation and tactics to sway people. As we said earlier, in the New Testament, the book of James, the word for someone who says one thing and does the opposite is double-minded. The English expression rendered from the original Greek term dipsukos, which has got that prefix there of di, which means two, and sukos, which is soul, means double or split, double-souled. Be of two minds, to be split in your thoughts. Term literally means double-souled or split soul. What James is communicating is that a person who holds two opposing positions in his mind, specifically about the Lord, but we can make applications elsewhere, and presents something as both true at one time and false at another time, that person is literally a contradiction, split in their own mind. And James, through the inspiration of God the Holy Spirit, describes such a person as unstable, unreliable, wavering in all their ways, being a liar. Someone who attempts to pass off two opposing facts as both being true, violating the law of non-contradiction, is not only unstable in that sense, but that person is unreliable in everything he does. This person cannot be trusted for anything. And, well, Summer, I think that's all I have. Do you have anything you want to add here before we shut it down for tonight?
No, I think you've covered it very well and given the people a lot to think about and more connections that we can all draw on and just see how this thing is playing out. And there's so much going on, so this won't be the last time that we cover this topic, that's for sure.
Hey, folks, if you'd like to see Summer on camera, go ahead and put a comment below the video. If you want to see Summer on camera, let us know in the comments below the video, or let us know in the live chat, because I'm just saying that because that's been a goal of ours for a long time, is to get our studio situated where she can be on camera. With me too. Or perhaps, this is not Summer's first choice, but this is something back here. We can have a setup where we're sitting.
Like a round table where we can each be on one side of the table.
Just like Redacted. Except we'll tell you the truth. We won't bring on UFO wackos.
That's right.
So anyway.
We promise you that.
All right. Well, I'm gonna end with a little promo here for the app, and then we'll cut it out from there. So thank you for being with me tonight.
Thank you, my
love you, and I appreciate you.
Love you.
And So
and
folks,
love you guys out there, and we love you guys out there.
Absolutely. The chat, there are still people here watching, and it's almost 2 a.m. So thank you for your support and your patience. Folks, we want to remind you, the Armor of Truth mobile app is free. It is free. And it will always be free. You'll get a direct link to wherever our live stream is. Exclusive content, James Bible study there, the Tracking Dystopia podcast where myself and Summer go deep diving in things we can't say here. So if we've earned your trust, please like this video, subscribe, share it, do all of those things because it actually helps. If you've been blessed by our work, email us at hello@armoroftruth.net and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Most companies like ours fail in the first 3 years. It's difficult to establish support. And today, given the climate of our culture, it's not just about working hard and earning your way. There are many organizations and even government agencies that are trying to take us out. They don't want Christian media organizations like Armor of Truth to succeed, so they intend to shut us down. But we serve the sovereign creator of the universe and all that's in it. It's Christ or chaos, my friends, and we need you. If you find value in the services we're providing here, as truly a boldly outspoken Christian voice of truth in a storm of competing worldviews, religions, and a global elite dictator class who are trying to silence us every day, please remember, grassroots movements still work. There is strength in numbers. So please, if you can, partner with us today to ensure that we're still here in 2024. If you can partner with us on a monthly basis, that really helps. Beyond the vague concept of progress and the greater good, we're preparing the hearts of believers for the onslaught of the spirit of the age and confronting unbelief with a biblical social theory that's radically different from all other social theories. Culture doesn't need a new Christ. They're a dime a dozen. The world needs the living Christ who comes to confront hearts in truth and to perfect in grace for good. Beyond the vague concept of progress and the greater good, we're preparing the hearts of believers for the onslaught of the spirit of the age. We don't expect it to be a comfortable ride. In fact, we rejoice at the opportunity to suffer for Christ and his gospel as his spirit brings conversions through his ambassadors. One heart at a time. We don't proclaim ourselves, but Christ is King, and we as your servants. Faith is resistance. Thank you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
World order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.